So the British pop music has this rhythm.
We're going to be talking about. I have worn civil clothes because casual clothes because we're going to talk about art today.
So the British pop music has this.
Friends, in our seminars, this is the fourth of our seminars. As you know, in our previous seminars, we have summarized the issues, the adventure of humanity on Earth, and then we criticized historicism and scientism, and then in the third conference, we criticized pedagogy and philosophy, and now we're going to criticize art. We will also be doing theology and mysticism, but this season is almost over, so we will have to do it in the next season. There are a lot of sub-branches, and there's a lot to talk about, but this season is coming to an end. This art criticism. So generally speaking, I'm going to be talking about the arts in general, of course. It is my habit. I never prepare for any of my speeches, so I'm going to be doing an extemporaneous speech again. So Tolstoy quotes a poet. I don't know what I'm going to say myself. All I know is that my song is coming to being. So I don't know what I'm gonna say, but we're gonna say what we will. Or as in a poem called Ocean of my own, I'm gonna sing a song and the sound will reverberate from the sky. But of course, you cannot do it without a program. What are we gonna talk about? We're gonna talk about an evaluation of art from the perspective of philosophy of history, and then we're gonna classify from technically and different arts and their characteristics. This is the second part. The characteristic distinctions, the plastic arts, the phonetic arts, and so on. And finally, the aesthetic evaluations is the final one. So now, as a philosopher historian, when you look at it as a philosopher historian to the history of humankind, to me, the humankind, the first and the primary activity, and perhaps the only noble activity of humankind is art. The human adventure started its adventure by trying to understand the world through art. Of course, we don't know. It's been 300,000 years. How did they live? How did they used to live? What was their environment like? What kind of art did they have, if they had? But there's something like this. In our age, still, there are pre-agricultural period cultures, and there are hundreds of them, examples, in Africa, in the Arctics, in the Andes, in Siberia, in many areas. And what do they call them? What are these people called? There's a term in English, so I can't remember it. But yeah, sometimes I get these recollections of words, but then I cannot remember. Anyway, Aborigines. They are called Aborigines. So these, the world's various geographical areas, still have people who haven't even learned agricultural. We can look at their lifestyles and. Like 200,000 years ago, the tribes, how they used to live, we can approximately compare and try to understand, with field work and anthropological analysis, through some comparison, we can understand it to some extent, and it's more solid than historical knowledge because it is still existent. So we can also examine it, but we don't have historical information, historical data, historical objects about the early stages of human life, whether it's art, language, or anything else, or their relationships between them. We don't know much. The thing that we know is just anthropological and archaeological evidences. According to this account, it's not possible to say something for certain, but from my own understanding of science, this is art. This is what I say from my own understanding of art. So the difference between art and artisanship. So who's going to establish this? So we usually are used to call them fine arts. There are 6 arts, and the last one is the cinema arts. Not just the fine arts, but all the arts. Which require all kind of any kind of skill, which includes artisanship. So artisanship works in the medieval ages can be really high quality artworks today. So today, how are we going to distinguish between these? In the following sessions, we're going to talk about that in the technical aspects. So now I'm going to skip that. And from my perspective, from my own understanding, it's the first activity of humankind, and because we know that from our early ages, as conventionally called Stone Ages, the humankind has sharpened some stones and made some stone axes. That's how art starts. That's there's an artifact, there's an axe, there's something using those flint stones and turning them into tools. And so what as a result, what they are doing is a kind of artwork. Today's profane and modern bourgeoisie understanding, these are artisanship or art. It can be discussed, but for me it is certainly art. And even my expectation of functionality from art, utility, a character is preserved in these works of art. They reflect this property of utility because it is caused originally from needs, necessities, from material necessities, and it's very functional. Of course, it's gonna hunt. The people are gonna hunt. They are gonna skin them. Make some stone tools and sharpen them and perfect them. Anthropologists have a saying: human is superior because it can use the thumb, because the thumb can grab. It has different characteristics than a monkey. The human hand and the thumb, the ability to hold and make tools, has become the human and started to think. And even the modern physician, the ghost in the mind, an Indian physiologist who worked with Francis Crick. I've got his book, but I don't remember the name. The human hand's effect on the area it encompasses in the human brain is much larger. So the human hand has a very large area, and it gives some reasons and explanations, but this is not our subject right now. We're not going to go into that detail. But the human hand plays a large role in shaping human thought. And the human starts shaping the tools and environment around him. He starts making houses, perhaps one of the earliest examples. So lives in the savannah, perhaps later they will live in the caves, but from the very early times, like 1 million years ago perhaps even. So they use axes and stone axes, and they are in the museums. You can find them in the museums in a lot of countries. So human starts with art and starts understanding his life and his environment and circumstance using art. It can be very primitive from our mentality. They gotta hunt. The human claws and teeth are not as strong as the other animals, since so they start developing these kind of functional tools. According to my own supposition, and at least for 40 or 50,000 years, they've been burying their dead. Through burying their dead, as we understand from the rituals. So there is a kind of animist and other shamanist belief has started to form, and this shows that the religion started to explicate the world. So it shows some respect to the dead, to spirits. So especially in the ancient Egypt, it was very, very intense in thinking about the afterworld. So we know that 30 or 40,000 years ago, in some caves in France, there are some mural paintings in the caves, and these are some of the humans' desire to express itself. This can be considered this way. Perhaps there was more before, in early times, but we don't know. We don't have archaeological and anthropological evidence. What do we have is human skeletons, and what we have is the remains of these human skeletons and the stone axes and the mural paintings. For example, in those times, did they have music? Did they have literature? I would say, in my book, The Meaning of Existence, its name was The Meaning and Significance of Existence. In the first chapter of that book, I said, the language that we speak, it started as poetry in the first times, in the earlier times. And the feature of poetry is, because it's memorable, and because it has got rhythm and measures, it can transfer some knowledge through poetry. Poetry is easy to remember. It's not like prose. It's got the memorability feature, and because of rhythm and rhyme, and depending on the character of the poem, so it's easy to remember. That's one. And another reason is, actually, when we use language, we do not realize, but we are doing some poetry. Because we use metaphors, some kinds of metaphors, and we even when we use the words literally in the dictionary, they were like some mazmun, a metaphor from the beginning. Because in order to express an object, you use a sound. You call it a glass, for example. But the thing that we call glass, the sound, a cup or glass, this sound, this noise, what kind of relation does it bear on the object? Does it have a one-to-one relationship? It's just a symbol. We just make a noise and we insert, we place some meaning in that word. And today, when we use Turkish, when we say bardak, the glass, everyone understands that word, whatever. So there is a meaning in the noise. So by hiding a meaning in the noise, because there is a hidden meaning, all words are kind of like a metaphor that contain a secret meaning. And it's I've quoted Ralph Waldo Emerson. The folk may fantasize that they hate poetry, but they don't realize that everyone who speaks is a poet, and they're mystics, because they believe in things that are non-existent. You believe in the meaning, the hidden meaning in the noises. That means a metaphor, placing something in something else. So it's a mazmun. So we make conventions and we verbalize them. So the necessity to use metaphors, so language is poetry, even if it's prose. Especially in the first stages, it's understood that it is poetry, and we can call it a supposition, but that's how it is. As a result, for example, since people start speaking, it's kind of like poetry, writing poetry. It's using metaphors, some kinds of hidden meanings, etc. You can evaluate it that way. From the early beginnings, with the human existence, the difference of human from the animal, because they have a creative imagination and they have a large imagination, ability to imagine, and mental capabilities are higher cognitive skills. These an artificial world that's to shape the world and give meaning to the world, which doesn't exist in the nature, and So the genetic. So creating some things that is not found inherently in the DNAs and the inheritance, biological inheritance. So the thing that we call culture is something artificial, and it is exactly opposite nature. There's culture and then there's nature. It is diametrically opposed. The biological, the animalistic, the genetic, the things that are found in nature, and in opposition to this, the things that humans create and that doesn't exist in nature, the products of culture, and that's what we call art. Art means also in Latin, this is the artificial. This is the thing that's made by humans. That's what it means. The made by humans. That means all arts are artificial. All arts are human imagination. In nature, there are sounds, but in nature, there's no music. But there's a precaution that I need to mention. Sometimes I'm really obliged to truth as a man of science. But the day before, we were listening to the sound of whales, the music of whales. The whales speak using compositions, music. And I was about to share it on Facebook, but we couldn't make it because of contact, the Russian Facebook. My son shared it through there. You can listen to it only in contact. There were other ones in YouTube, but they are not as beautiful. So my son shared this whale music, and it was high quality music. It's when you compare it to human music, it was high quality music. I'm gonna go into the details and the technique aspects in soon. For now, as I said, from a historian's perspective, we are talking about the history of art. From a historian's perspective, this activity of art is the oldest activity of humanity and perhaps the noblest of them. Since it is the creative product of the creative imagination, it's a product of creative imagination. And to take it one step further, when Yahya Kemal mentioned art, we all have some kind of creative ability, since we are all kind of like a little gods, divine. This is the creative side of humanity, the imagination and creating something new. The ability to create something new, which is not found in animals. This is the primary feature of humans. So we can call it the noblest activity of humankind. But art is artificial. It's artificial. It's human-made. It's not natural. And in the old art forms, some criticisms that they are like artificial for the old traditional forms of art. We told that we are going to technical to the second and aesthetics to the third chapter, but let's go on from the historical perspective. So this art activity of art after the civilized stages takes a different form, takes a different shape. It takes a much more developed form. In the medieval ages, it was integrated with religion, and Collingwood, one of the contemporary philosophers of history, in his book called Speculum Mentis, the mirror of mind, and it's translated into